that's available to issue units within the 6-4 mechanism. The LDCs and SITs are exempted from the share of proceeds for adaptation, but they may choose not to exercise that function. And then the transition earlier was not allowing afforestation and reforestation activities. This is primarily the transition activities, but we know now that from Baku it has allowed the transition of the AR activities as well. And then morning I did mention about the authorization, which is a hard-fought win by the African group in terms of flexibility on timing of authorization to transfer units from one country to the other for compliance purposes. Here, the template or the form in which that you authorize such transfer, you have to follow the template that will be prepared by the UNFCCC. And we are anticipating to have this template available by this week. So countries, when they engage in transfer of mitigation outcomes, they will be able to use these templates. And it's a mandatory requirement to use these templates. And then I also would invite the PACM, unlike the previous Kyoto mechanism, this mechanism will now have appeals and grievance. So the process of appeals and grievance was done last year. The call for experts have been launched. And there will be an extended timeline because of some request from some of the people asking to extend the time for making application. So the appeals and grievance process is available, which is inclusive for countries and for project participants to air any views once the supervisory body has made any decisions or throughout the process. The DNAs has touched 98. The DOAs who will be undertaking the third-party validation and verification, we hit at 20 plus. The new activities that have submitted for prior notification have crossed more than 1,000. The transition activities approval has been provided for 15 plus projects. The transition activities have already completed the global stakeholder process. The technical expert panel will be meeting in 2 weeks and will advance the work on the other standards and tools which could be used by project developers and private sector to undertake activities. We are also working on revising top-down methodology on areas related to energy, transport, waste management, and distributed systems like the efficient cook stoves and water purifier. So this is something has been prioritized by the supervisory body as a means to move forward with implementation. So to sum up, I would say that the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism is here now, and our colleagues from IETA are also in the room, and it was often expressed that once the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism becomes available, there will be more interest in participation by various private actors. And we from the Secretariat here, along with the supervisory body, one or two members, I'm not sure whether Alik is there right now, but yeah, we have quite a broad representation from Africa, including the LDC seat. We have about 5 members from African region, part of the supervisory body at this moment. So we are all available to make sure that the fully functional PACM becomes reality going forward. Over to you in the room, Willie.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Perumal. Can you still hear us? I hope Perumal will stay online so that you can ask him questions later on. I think I like very much what he said towards the end. PACM is here now. And I think that's a very important signal because there's been a long wait for Article 6.4 to be operational. And some of the key messages that he shared with us is that the parties have now given clear direction. The supervisory body is now working, which means that the conversation now should be how do we then start moving forward and considering implementation. It's very good to have the panel here with me today. Mr. Alik Muvandika from Zambia and Article 6.4 Supervisory Board member. Mr. Stefan Hock from Perspectives Group. Mr. Anatha Kathik from Up Energy. And of course, Mr. Joop Veterings from the European Commission. We will now have another presentation by the Perspectives Group. Stefan Hock, they can roll your presentation now.
Thank you. Can we get the slides, please? What I'm trying to say is now directly building on what Perumal has been explaining to us, and I want to underpin these messages a little bit more with some facts and figures, so to speak, from Eastern Africa. Next slide. So, Perumal has already made, I think, the first points, but I do want to add maybe a little nuance. So we cannot yet register new activities under the PACM, even though it is there. Why? Because we are still lacking the new methodologies. But I do want to also make a proactive invitation also to the private sector representatives here and the project developers to engage in this process, because we've seen in the past as well the beauty of the CDM is that it's a bottom-up system that allows for innovation based on private sector initiative. And I think we are still in the process of understanding what this new mechanism means. It was a long time in the making, but we have all the standards now. That was a very clear message from Perumal. And while UNFCCC is working on that, while some governments are working on that, I think those project developers that do want to engage in the mechanism can also accelerate this process on their own initiative. And of course, we have a very significant portfolio. Perumal has nicely mentioned that. And in my view, it's still not fully understood that there is a real opportunity to very rapidly build a portfolio of in the PACM in the Eastern African coast countries. It's clear that supply and demand signals are only beginning to emerge now after COP29, but also get into that a little bit more. So, the data you see here is a little bit outdated. We have been supporting the Eastern African Alliance with a number of technical work, some knowledge products. And 2 years ago, we provided an update to the carbon market portfolio of each Eastern African Alliance member country, as well as the regional summary, so to speak. So what you see here is that we have quite a critical mass of CDM activities, 52 project activities, 61 POA with almost 450 component projects. So more than 500 activities, which is probably more than many people would have expected. We see that the issuance success was not so great, frankly speaking, what probably has to do a lot with market dynamics, but I don't have a very good explanation for that. But that also means, by extension, that there is a lot of issuance potential, even based on the existing PACM pipeline. Now, breaking that down a little bit more by country, so you can see that there are frontrunners, clearly Kenya, Uganda, but also Rwanda, Ethiopia. But each country has a certain stake. I'll keep this very brief to honor your request, Willie. But this one here I find really interesting. So this is from the global UNEP-CCC database in Article 6, and it looks at the transition potential of CDM transition activities globally. So what you see here is, first of all, that within the African region, Eastern Africa really stands out significantly. So 80% of all the activities requesting transition, almost the same number that I just showed, are from Eastern Africa. And this is actually really surprising, 20% of the activities globally that are requesting transition are from Eastern Africa. So that really underlines that the region has a huge stake in the PACM, based on the existing portfolio, and that is not even yet accounting for all the opportunities for new projects with the more innovative technologies that we haven't yet seen in the CDM. In my understanding, host countries are still pondering, whether to grant the transition requests, and I think now the time window is slowly beginning to close, and I think there is no good reason, frankly, to wait. And I would really call on countries, on one hand, to take this now very seriously and accelerate the evaluation process. And to the private sector, again, I would like to repeat the message that there is an opportunity to accelerate the process. And of course, once we have the new methodologies in place, especially the existing POAs can be expanded with new activities as well. And that is really, I think, a very good way, very interesting way to very rapidly build up a PACM portfolio at scale. So this is the summary of these carbon market portfolios that I just mentioned, which you can find at the Eastern African Alliance website, even though they're now 2 years old and probably require some update. This one shows you the visualization of the prior consideration notifications. So all the project developers that have expressed their interest to develop new Article 6.4 activities. And you can see also here the red dots are from Africa. So you can see, first of all, a significant number of activities spread across a variety of sectors, including transport, which we didn't see much in the CDM. Surprisingly low number of energy projects, to be honest, but maybe because already a lot of them are in the CDM. So as I said, these are only the new ones. So you can see a large number of prospective projects and also of significant scale, in which, as I said, Africa is very well represented. So we clearly see it's not just about getting the old projects, those that meet all new criteria, into the PACM, but also there is already a huge lineup of prospective future projects. So Perumal has mentioned the timeline, but again, I wanted to show it briefly, that there is now a lot of work within the UNFCCC Secretariat to expedite the work on the methodologies, but again, the call also to the private sector and project developers to engage in this process. And we've seen that a lot in the CDM in the past. Also, our company Perspectives was working with many private sector project developers to develop new CDM methodologies back in the old days. And we are looking forward to also support you with updating the methodologies to accelerate the process, as I mentioned. So the opportunities really are, harnessing the benefits of the existing portfolio, innovation by expanding to new technologies that we didn't see in the CDM, e-mobility. We had a whole session on carbon removals, which basically didn't take place in the CDM, with very few exceptions. Green fertilizer, green cooling, green hydrogen, a lot of new technologies that didn't feature much in the CDM, but where we now need actually new methodology development and new project development in particular. The guidance is there, Perumal has made it clear, and also the national frameworks are now evolving in response to COP29 decisions. So I think we are in a good place. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now. Where are these ITMOs that received authorizations? We'll have a whole session dedicated to that tomorrow. But there's many steps that need to be put in place, but at least from our observations, more and more countries are now heavily engaged in this process, many in advanced stages. Kenya may be the most advanced one, with some very few other exceptions, Ghana, Senegal, etc. What I would also really like to draw attention to is that there is, in parallel now to the Article 6 frameworks, there is a process of updating the NDCs. And I think this now is really the opportunity, because this takes place only every 5 years, regularly at least. This now really is the opportunity in this very critical time window to showcase to the world where do countries see the potential for carbon markets. Most NDCs have expressed a clear wish to engage in carbon markets in the past, but they weren't always very clear. So I think this process, which in some countries is only just starting, is really a very good opportunity to be as clear as possible. What are the policies? What are the priority technologies that you want to put forward and make available also to the carbon market? But we also need to have a better cooperation between the public and the private sector. We often talk about what can the private sector do, what can the government do, but we need to find better ways also of interacting and of understanding each other in a better way, so that policies can be designed in a more effective way, and also that the private sector has a better understanding what is government looking for and what is it intending to authorize. I've mentioned demand signals initially, and in the past, before we had Article 6.4 rules clearly agreed at COP29, most of the buyers were, of course, quite intensely focused on bilateral cooperation. And personally, I'm really encouraged by what I see from some of the major buyers, where we have soft signals so far. We have very few countries that have clearly come forward with the intention to buy Article 6.4 ERs, sometimes also only for voluntary purposes, such as Germany. But I think the signals are very clear from Switzerland, from Sweden, from UK, from Germany, even the EU Commission. I recently just learned that in the EU ETS directive, there is a clear commitment to accept Article 6.4 credits for CORSIA. So not for the ETS, the traditional destination for CDM credits, but for CORSIA, the EU has now even moved ahead of ICAO to make a very clear statement that it intends to, allow the use of these Article 6.4 credits, and that is, of course, also an entry point for future discussions. So I hope this becomes even more clear throughout the world. And the last thing I want to leave you with, is that it has been said before, and I very much appreciated also that Dr. Pacifica in the early welcome remarks made it very clear that environmental integrity is key for Kenya. Because we've seen in the past that, a lack of trust can make this politically created market implode very quickly. So I think we are all well advised to really put both environmental and social integrity front and center now of also carbon market development. But I'm also really encouraged by a lot of developments that took place here, benefit sharing, etc. Final slide. I just want to acknowledge also the support by the German government for our work in this process. Germany is supporting now also a support project for the rollout of the Article 6.4 mechanism as another indication that Germany is supporting this mechanism. And we are both working with project developers, but also host countries in enabling participation in the mechanism, as well as providing some regular summaries of the SBM meetings, etc. So I invite you to take a look at that, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Stefan. I think we definitely should be glad to hear that there's a lot of opportunities, especially for NDCs, to showcase potential for carbon markets, and that there is demand. Opportunities and demand, I think that's one of the biggest, that's a very positive way of looking at things right now. I will now get into a segment where I'll ask some of the other panelists some questions. And I think we're lucky to have an insider from the supervisory body, Mr. Alik. What do you think are the operationalization of Article 6.4 has been slower than anticipated, and what would be the key political, technical, or financial barriers that would cause further delays?
Well, thank you, Mr. Moderator, for having me here. Yeah, but maybe before I answer your question, let me just make a few clarifications, which I started hearing this morning, where people are saying the PACMA is going to replace the CDM. Well, it's correct, but it's not totally true. The CDM will continue running. As we speak now, there are 10,000 CDM projects that are still even asking for issuance of credits. So whilst the PACMA is running, the CDM is also actively running. So the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism is a totally different mechanism from the CDM. But for projects to transition to Article 6, if they were under the Kyoto Protocol, they have to be CDM projects. I think that's the clarification that I need to make. The mechanism is not, the PACMA is not replacing the CDM per se. Yeah. So in terms of the process, why is it taking long? Well, that's a good question you've raised. But suffice to say that there are processes that have to be followed. And one of the key process is that countries need to have established DNAs for CDM projects to transition into the new mechanism, the Paris Agreement credit mechanism. As we speak now, actually the pattern is running because last month when the supervisory board met, they approved one CDM project to transition into the Paris Agreement credit mechanism. So as we speak, the mechanism is up and running. Yeah. So these are two, I mean, this is a major thing that I need people to be aware of for projects to transition to the Paris Agreement mechanism. We need to have a CDM, a DNA in place. Without that, a country or projects that are operating in such a country will not transition. So that really is something that must be known by all of us. And just to speak about this, I mean, there are 1,500 CDM projects that showed interest to transition into the new mechanism as of 31st December 2023, because that was a deadline for project participants to indicate their intention to transition. And as I speak now, let me see if I have the actual figures. Yeah, by the beginning of this month, that's March, we had 33 CDM projects approved by their respective DNAs to transit to Article 6.4. And half of this, you can't believe that they're actually located in the African region. So 50% of the projects that have been approved by their respective DNAs are actually coming from the African region. So this is a huge plus for us, although most of them are from Uganda and Ghana, as Christopher indicated. So there are three project activities and 12 POAs that have been approved from the African region by their respective DNAs. So in short, Mr. Moderator, why we are seeing this slowness is because most of the countries have not yet put in place their DNAs in place. As I speak now, we've got 99 DNAs, which just represents about half of the countries that signed the Paris Agreement. So the issue of transitioning to the new mechanism has actually triggered the establishment of DNAs in these countries, which is a good thing. So for now, I think let me stop there.
Thank you so much for that. I think we now know where or what might cause further delays, and we need to be encouraging countries that have not yet designated or that have not nominated DNAs to do so. I'll now move on to my next question on policy frameworks and regional collaboration. So, Mr. Yop, effective policy is critical for PSEM's success. What specific measures should Eastern African countries or governments adopt to incentivize Article 6.4 participation?
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Maybe just one word about myself. I'm a member of the Task Force International Carbon Pricing and Market Diplomacy at the European Commission. And what we do is we work with partner countries to enhance and strengthen domestic carbon pricing instruments, to help operationalize Article 6 and to ensure high integrity in voluntary carbon markets. That's what we try to do. And we do that together with partner countries. That's why I'm here. And I think I can say that we very much welcome Article 6.4 as a new quality standard. I think we strongly believe that we would recommend countries that want to consider to make corresponding adjustments for Article 6 to do so very strategically in sectors that are transformational, whether it comes to technology transfer, whether it's catalytic in other ways, but to make sure that the impact to the country, to the climate agenda, but also the development agenda is greater than just the credit that we talk about. I think a second thing that I would say, and of course what this means in practice will very much depend on the national context of the countries themselves, but it is that to do this all well, it actually takes quite some effort. And I think we already mentioned the DNA that will need to be in place. It will also come with new processes, sufficient capacity. There's the link to the NDC. There's the mitigation strategies and having an understanding of what the costs are of the different abatement options. You've got to have a good MRV system in place. The registry, regulations, we spoke about it earlier today. It actually takes quite a lot. And well, I think we can definitely learn from what other countries have done. The national context matters a lot. So as the European Commission, we are here to support. We want to support more than we have in the past. That can come in the form of technical assistance. It can come in capacity building and all kinds of forms. For example, here in Kenya, we plan to support Kenya on its MRV system over the next couple of years to step that up. And in neighboring Tanzania, we are working together with UNEP as the implementing partner for a new project. It's called IAA6, Integrated Assessment for Article 6, to really understand the mitigation strategies and engage for Article 6 in a very strategic way. And maybe lastly, one thing I'm being asked a lot is, aside from all of this capacity building and technical assistance, what about demand from the EU for Article 6 credits, which would definitely help a lot. I think what would be good to mention there is that given the domestic nature of the NDCs that the EU has set, it does not intend to use Article 6 for its own net zero commitment, climate neutrality commitment by mid-century. And as such, is not an Article 6 buyer. However, there are some individual member states, and we heard the example of Sweden earlier today, that might choose to go beyond the EU-wide NDC. We heard about CORSIA demand, also from European airlines. We do expect that indeed to be a significant source of demand. We have on the private sector, more on the voluntary side, in Europe, we are right now in the process of negotiating the Green Claims Directive, which is a new piece of legislation that will determine or will basically stipulate how European companies can make green claims, which include but are not limited to carbon credit use. It's currently undergoing trilogue negotiations in Brussels between the Parliament, the Council and the Commission. And we hope that in the next couple of months there will be clarity for our companies on how to engage in these markets, and that will then result in greater demand. And then lastly, one thing that has also come up recently in discussions quite a bit is, some of you might have heard about the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which is some sort of, it's our way to address carbon leakage. So when you import goods into the European Union that are covered by this piece of regulation, there is a levy based on carbon intensity, to basically ensure a level playing field and to avoid carbon leakage. Now the question that's of course being asked is, like, would carbon credits count? Because the CBAM has been designed in a way that there's no double taxation or no double pricing of carbon, which means that if there has been a carbon price effectively paid in a third country, it would be deducted as a discount to what would need to be paid at the EU border. And in some countries, like for example South Africa, you have a carbon tax where carbon credits can be used as well. Now, right now the Commission is reviewing these different pricing instruments, and by the end of the year there will be an implementing act that will stipulate what counts as a discount and what that doesn't count. So that's a bit the timeline for that potential source of demand. And let me finish here for now.
Thank you so much for those very helpful words. Some of the key takeaways, and it was good that Mr. Mvundika mentioned about countries needing to nominate DNAs. And now we've been just told that there's specific things that countries need to start considering. For example, they need to have national contacts. They should try and link their carbon markets to NDCs. There's a need for MRV systems and registries, etc. The good thing about all this is that countries do not need to go about all these things alone. There is support. There's capacity building from different stakeholders, and we should try and be making the connection so that we can offer that support to countries who need. I will now switch gears and go to a question to our panelists from Up Energy. It's on innovation. So Article 6.4 encourages new methodologies beyond traditional offsetting. What do you believe would be the untapped opportunities for Eastern African countries in different sectors like regenerative agriculture, waste to energy, etc., etc.?
Hello. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Firstly, about me and UpEnergy. UpEnergy is is a project developer working in Global South to support the equitable decarbonization journey. This is achieved through developing carbon projects that supports that's able to tap the international climate finance. We have done primarily improved cook stove, including electric stoves, safe water devices, and now looking at biochar and agroforestry. So to your question, of course, when we look at decarbonization journey for any country, and until now we have done carbon projects based on the methodologies that are available in the standards. Of course, the private sector had the opportunity to submit their own methodologies in the past as well. But now in the PACM, it's more integrated approach. The government is developing their own, reviewing their NDCs every 5 years. The private sector has opportunity to look at what are the key areas that government would like to have support when it comes to international finance, or where there is a better potential in terms of decarbonization. And so the avenue, when you talk about, let's say, regenerative agriculture, there might not be methodology that's readily available to suit a particular approach of doing a project. But the private sector will be able to study the different countries, NDCs, and develop a suitable methodologies that supports the project development in those countries, and propose that to the PACM. And of course, it's a long process on methodology development. It might take a year or two, but there is a pathway. And East African nation, it's agriculture is a huge potential here, which was not tapped, let's say, in Kyoto. So PACM could be a vehicle to bring in a lot of decarbonization strategy on, let's say, tea plantation, coffee plantations, or rice, or any other agricultural sector. But more than that, I think when we look at equitable decarbonization, we can also have projects that is already, you can leapfrog on technology. For example, UpEnergy is working on electric, though there is a long way to go in terms of energy access in these countries. But there are pockets in Africa that are still serviceable when it comes to electric cook stoves. Why to have an intermediate solution? Can we leapfrog a traditional cook stove directly into an electric cooking? So those are the interesting opportunity we can, any sector. This is an energy example. You can look at any other product-based or process-based mitigation or removal intervention. So we can tap any sort of opportunity and develop projects and tap, if we are able to get the right price to develop that project, we can of course explore that. Yeah. Thank you.
Round of applause, please. Yeah, thank you so much. It's very interesting that most of the panelists are sharing that there is a lot of potential. There's a lot of opportunities. And I think that's one of the good things, that we are in a space where, with the approval or with the decision coming out of Baku and having these sessions now, there's really hope to be able to move forwards. I have a last question for Stefan, and I was saving this for last because you had a lot of data, and I'm sure there's many participants who will probably want to ask you questions. But could you just tell us that since the CDM laid groundwork for carbon markets, but its transition to Article 6.4's PACM might face some technical and administrative hurdles, and maybe you picked on some of that in your presentation. So based on your experience, what do you think would be the most critical lessons that the Eastern African countries can apply from the CDM era to fast-track legacy projects into PACM?
That's a good question, because I think there are various factors at play. One key success factor is really the stability of demand. I mean, we've seen that in Kenya, you know, how the carbon market portfolio was building up really impressively, and when a single buyer at that time, the EU, you know, was changing its mind, the whole thing imploded. So having a diversification of buyers and stable buyer relationships has very often in the Eastern African carbon market portfolio been a success factor also for effective issuance. So if Sweden buys the credits of one project or any other buyer, that was a huge factor also for issuance success, that there is a clear demand signal, a stable demand signal over crediting periods. Another thing that I think is very crucial now, especially as we are entering into new territory, is not just think about capacity building. We really need to bring together the technical assistance and financial investments so that we have actual projects, not just theory, but that we really do the training and the capacity building on the job. That I think is absolutely crucial. And then I do think I was actually very pleased when Kazoo was digging back in old hazy memories and was mentioning the Nairobi framework, because I'm often struggling to understand, you know, why are we not investing more in capacity building? So the Nairobi framework was giving a lot more resources to countries for getting access to the CDM back in the late 2000s. Article 6 is a whole different challenge for many host countries, but the support that is being provided to countries is much less. So in many countries, like I remember in Rwanda, there was a DNA secretary that had 3 full-time staff supported, you know, by this program. In each country, you had an office of UNEP or whoever it was, and we really need to scale up significantly capacity building and bring it together with actual investments. That would be, in my view, the key lessons. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Could we please give him a round of applause? Again. That brings me to the last set of questions for the panelists, but I think there might be people in the room who would still have burning questions. So I'll open the floor for a very quick Q&A. Yes, Robert.
Thank you very much, Willie. I think my question goes to Job from the European Union. My name is Robert from UNDP. Just very quickly, if I understood you correctly, CBAM is not open for offsets from Article 6 related activity. Did I get that correct?
No. So we don't know yet. The Commission is currently in the process of studying what effective carbon prices to consider for applying a discount at the EU border when importing goods covered by CBAM, which means as much as, we just don't know yet. By the end of the year, we expect to have an implementing act, basically to have the answer to this question. But the way it looks right now is that when a company is buying a credit on a voluntary basis, it will very likely not count. If it is buying a credit to meet a compliance obligation, for example, under the South Africa carbon tax, it might count. And how that will exactly be considered is currently being studied, and not just for South Africa, but for basically all countries that apply a carbon price domestically. And then a producer of such a good can, of course, I just think it's really important to highlight, ideally, instead of paying this border adjustment certificate, would decarbonize and reduce the emissions. That would also reduce the exposure. And that's also something that we want to help partner countries with, to decarbonize, and then we get back to the NDCs and the climate commitments that we talk about initially. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Job. We have 2 more on this side. Lady first.
Sorry, it's just to build on the question that he was asking just now. You mentioned that VCMs most likely won't count. Could you probably expand on that?
Yeah, so the way that the CBAM was designed is it's not an optional thing. Like if you import into Europe a good that's covered by CBAM based on the carbon intensity and based on the effective carbon price already paid in the country of production, it's a compliance scheme. It's related to our own emissions trading system in Europe. And as such, only a compliance price would be recognized. That's right now the way it looks like in the discussions. So that's that's the decision. I can't really say more about it.
Thank you. There was one more on that side.
Okay. This was going to be a question for Stefan, but it could be for any other panelist. And when I see the title of the session, which is opportunities, milestones and opportunities, but I tend to see the opportunities in terms of scale. Not just to have a niche market for a few 100 million tons, something that really moves the needle. But I was also listening to something that you are right, which is the need for capacity building. There is a lot. And at the same time, I was keeping this idea that in order to scale something, in order to get volume, you have to have abundant inputs. If you have very, very specific things that you have to put into the equation, it's difficult to gain scale. So question is, if achieving scale is the opportunity, what are the pathways?
Thanks. Well, I think we all wish, the market gets to scale quickly and helps to achieve not only, liquidity, but investment and sustainable development contributions, right? I mean, carbon markets are never an objective in themselves. They're supposed to help countries achieve their climate and development targets. And at the moment, I think the demand signals are just not there yet, quite frankly, to really have a credible case to make that there will be hundreds of millions of tons, at least on an annual basis. I think on the supply side, we very clearly see the opportunity. And when I was saying earlier, I was probably a bit too narrow when I said, countries should use their NDC updates to showcase now what is their potential. Of course, we are also hoping, maybe even more, that the potential buyer countries are also using now NDC updates to strengthen their ambition by going beyond their current targets, including through carbon markets. So in that sense, I'm very sympathetic, to the point you raised. But I think we've also seen in the past few years, several initiatives proposing that there would be fantastic, mobilization of investments through the voluntary carbon market, which I very much support. But I always like to also keep it a little bit sober and realistic. So I do think what we are doing right now is laying the foundation. And I think a lot of the buyers, because of lack of trust, frankly, from experiences in the past, have been a bit hesitant. So I think we really need to take it stepwise, build the trust. But then also, I'm not saying take it slow, I'm saying take it stepwise, because we don't have much time to address the climate crisis, right? I want this to move fast, but we should at the same time remain credible and realistic. And rather, building it up slowly based on high integrity rather than risking again the next big scandal that will risk the whole thing. That's my biggest worry, quite frankly. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Yes, at the back, one more.
Yeah, hi. I actually don't have a question, but rather a comment to the last two questions, I would say. Where I think there's a lot of opportunities in really looking into sectors as well, which can also mean looking into hard-to-abate sectors, including CBAM sectors. So going on from the other side, saying that carbon markets can support countries in really reducing the emissions, really going for transformation or going for green growth in those sectors, so that CBAM, for instance, won't even be applied because the sector is going to be decarbonized anyhow. So kind of like taking that as an opportunity for carbon markets to decarbonize those sectors, help decarbonize those sectors, or help bring them in a green way, so these tariffs don't even apply. So I think this is kind of a different way of looking into this. And then going for your question, yes, I also think that we also have to look into scaling up, and I don't have an answer how exactly that looks like, but in general, going into kind of like a sectoral approach can be one of those things, but there's also other thoughts at the moment going around. There's policy crediting that is being looked at, and POA, so not having one little project at a time, but really coming together. And I see Perumal has switched on his camera, so I don't know if he also wanted to add something to that.
Thanks. Thank you, Rachel. Perumal, yes.
Thanks, Rachel. Good to hear some very familiar voices, Rachel. And I think I also heard Gabriel in between. I think basically I just wanted to say, I agree, I think we need to make sure that the scale is something that we need to look for to what we have experienced in the past. And I've been speaking, I think last week, I know that Kazu is also there in the room today. So last week in our deliberations, it's quite clear that the PACM mechanism by itself is designed compared to the Kyoto mechanism. It's not limited to activity scales. So it's quite open in terms of, it's quite scale agnostic in terms of accepting types of activities that come from either at a facility level or at a program level or at a sector level or at a policy level. But each of them need to have specific considerations and a lot of developments happening outside. And including, I think, Rachel, I think it was you, because I didn't hearing properly in terms of the names when they are introduced. So I think, in terms of the policy crediting, etc., I think it's for sure that it needs to be looked at. And I know that there are efforts happening outside. The supervisory body is also looking at the various elements related to when you have policy crediting and when you go to that level of a macro level, how the different elements and components of the carbon markets can be ensured. And I also agree with, and we should not look at only at that highest scale. And I think we heard from Karthik, I think from Up Energy some time ago in the panel about looking at also there are actions that need to still happen in each countries, not at that scale. So we always shouldn't lose the sight of a broader scale always. And I think we should look at all scales, be it small, medium, or large. We need to facilitate all of them to go through in a way that the transaction costs are reduced. And also the scale and the speed that in which that we need to move forward. We always should keep in mind that these carbon markets often provides incentive for countries to reduce emissions, and also at the same time that we need to make sure that these units that are being traded in this market are of highest level of environmental integrity. I think that's what something Alik was talking about, why it is still taking time in terms of implementation. Its primary thing is that the carbon markets, when they are transferred internationally to be used for another country's NDC or for any other compliance purpose, the parties to the Paris Agreement has agreed that the market mechanisms actually contribute in reducing emissions, and they do not contribute or facilitate, even in an unintended manner, to increase in level of emissions elsewhere. So these are the different safeguards and integrity provisions that the carbon market players are doing. There's a huge opportunity that lies. And one of the things we didn't talk about, the Paris Agreement crediting mechanism, is about its opportunity to be used as in the voluntary sector as MCUs. And I see more and more PACM as a mechanism will be taken up for actions that are helping countries to reduce emissions without actually trading the units outside of the host country jurisdiction, meaning the right of reduction remains within the countries, where the other countries will be channeling that money and get recognized for their contribution towards the 1.3 trillion NCQG climate finance. And I think that I didn't hear from this panel, probably in other panels that conversation might have happened, but I just wanted to say that within the design of the PACM, it's not a compliance tool. It also can be facilitated and used for voluntary tool, and also an effective MRV tool to look at the channeling of the climate finance that comes towards the 1.3 trillion Baku-Belem roadmap. Over to the room. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Perumal, for that intervention, which actually is very timely because I would consider that as your closing remarks. Since we've run out of time, I think the conversations can carry on when you meet with the panelists during coffee breaks or at the reception this evening. So I'd like to take this opportunity now to give each panelist at least a few minutes to just give us some closing remarks, and then we can wind up. We can start with the closest, Yop, and then we just go to the other side.
Yeah, I think one thing that when I look back at today, I reflect, I'm really excited about the momentum that I'm seeing here in the room and the progress that has been made to date. And I think my closing remark or comment would be that we as the European Commission and our member states are very committed to help make this a success, and look forward to engaging with you.
Yeah, I mean, from me, following the Baku decision, I think removal activities will be key under Article 6.4, considering its enormous potential under nature-based solutions. But notwithstanding, the problematic issues of monitoring, and I think that's where capacity building is required to, countries in this part of the world. So capacity building from the UNFCCC and other organizations will be welcomed because this really, provides an enormous potential for us, as Africa. Most of the emission reductions will come from nature-based solutions. Thank you.
So I think we have waited for like close to 5 years now. So it's great that now we have a mechanism. There are different level stages at which the projects might be. Like someone could have operated in CDM and looking to transition. Someone might have implemented and submitted prior consideration that looking to develop like a new PSAM project, or they're going to start now. So I think all these options are still open, like as like private sector or engaging with the government. So we have to like keep developing all these three options. Like for example, UpEnergy has projects on all three stages. So we are going to transition all our CDM projects to PSAM. We have implemented few projects that we would want to register as a new PSAM project that we have implemented already. And also looking at like closely working with the NDCs and developing new opportunities within the PSAM sector by developing new methodologies that we can register with PSAM, etc. So